Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Creative Alabama podcast. I'm Josh Hamilton. So I did 2 interviews for this podcast in 2020, and this one was way back in the summer. Was it June, July? I can't remember anymore. I spoke with Kristen Iskandrian, writer of the novel Motherest, and also a co-owner of the independent bookstore Thank You Books right here in Birmingham. We talked about how she and her family landed in Alabama, her process for putting words on a page, and the realities of being a working writer versus the romanticized idea of what it's like to write fiction and get published. Thank you for tuning in to the second episode, and here is Kristen Iskandrian. Hello, Kristen.
Hello, Joshua.
Welcome to the Creative Alabama podcast.
I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you for hosting me in your wonderful bookstore. I didn't get to come in here enough before the pandemic times.
Right. Well, who could know
Right.
that the clock was ticking?
So this podcast is just about creative people, your process, what you do, and how you do it.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what I like to explore. Tell our listeners, of which there are none currently, tell us about your first book, Motherest.
Okay, sure. So Motherest came out in 2017, which feels like a century ago.
Right.
And in the publishing world, you sell a book and you're looking at about 2 years until it actually comes out. So, we sold Motherest in, I guess it was about 2015, which seems like 2 centuries ago. So, in many ways it feels, although it's still, relatively recent, it feels kind of like a very different time. And it was a very different time. And I think the moment that we're in currently, sort of the entirety of our lives before March, feels like a very different time. But Motherest was a book that took me several years to write. I'd say about 3 or more years to write. And I was recently finished with grad school. I'd gotten my PhD at University of Georgia. I had written a creative dissertation that had this sort of critical component to it. And the creative part of it was a collection of short fiction, which is sort of my first love. And when I finished with all of that and I successfully defended the dissertation and I moved out of the world of kind of theory and reading for school and reading for scholarship, it was this very slow and kind of painful return to reading for pleasure and writing for pleasure. Mm-hmm. And Motherest kind of came out of that time. I was also, a pretty new mother, and I was adjuncting at UGA. My husband was a high school English teacher at the time. Our resources just across the board were very thin. Our time, money, energy. But it was kind of a book that was written in the, proverbial stolen moments, like early in the morning and nap times and in between, grading and other things. Ultimately, I stopped teaching. I started freelancing, and I found a little bit more of a rhythm with my writing life. It was still chaotic, but it was, I guess, a different chaos, and that felt easier for a time. So, I finished this book kind of, I guess I should say it was also the first thing I'd completed out of the realm of the workshop. So it felt very private. It was just something that I was writing. I really was not sharing it with anybody. I was not in any kind of informal writing group, or a few friends read a few pieces. My husband read bits and pieces here and there, but he didn't even read the whole thing until it was close to done. I had one agent, and then I found my current agent, who's become a dear friend to me. I had had some success publishing short stories. I had gotten an O. Henry Prize, and But like really, I knew nothing about the world of publishing. I'm still learning a lot about that world.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so she went out with it, and we got a nice offer, and the process of editing it in earnest and working with an actual editor, and then all the rest of the stuff that kind of comes along with that happened. So it's a very long-winded answer to your question.
No, it's great. It's great. I love long-winded. It's perfect. So where are you from originally, and so on?
I am originally from the Philadelphia area. I, never really expected to be in the South. I, left home to go to college in Massachusetts, graduated college, returned to the Philadelphia area for a little while, lived in New York for the kind of requisite couple of years. And around that time, my parents moved from the house that I had, lived and grown up in all my life, to Birmingham, which was a huge shock. Like, Birmingham was nowhere on the radar. We didn't have family here. We didn't have any connections here. But my parents are physicians. My mom is since retired, and my dad is close to being retired. But yeah, he took a job at UAB. But that was like close to 20 years ago, and they are like the biggest Birmingham fans at this point. I mean, they really took to it very quickly, very wholly. But around like the year after they moved here, this was when I was in New York, my mom was diagnosed with leukemia. She is still alive and kicking. They gave her a very scary, her outlook was not good, but she was lucky to have excellent treatment. She responded really well to drugs that weren't even approved by the FDA yet. She was in a lot of these kind of experimental studies. So at that point, I kind of felt like I was really far from my parents and worried about them. And then kind of that threw my whole life into this series of questions. And I had begun to toy with the idea of graduate school. And I thought, well, what if I just considered like Southern schools, and then at least I could be, driving distance and not have to get on a plane should anything happen. So, you have a different brain at like 22, 23, 24. I just think of those years with a lot of like, whoa, Kristen. Like you just, in certain ways, I felt myself trying to be this, open-hearted, giving, generous, and selfless person. But I think it's such a self-absorbed time of life that,
absolutely,
it all just seems to come back to like, well, what's good for me? And like, what could I see myself doing? But anyway, that's what brought me and my then, we weren't married yet, but Brian came along for the ride, and we settled in Athens, Georgia, kind of figuring that we would get our degrees. But I really thought I was going to get my master's and then kind of split. But I ended up, staying on for the PhD. And then, we lived there for 11 years.
Wow.
It was just a very easy town to stay in. If you've ever spent any time in Athens, it's such a wonderful place, kind of like the best of the college town. And also a very interesting, I know so many creative people who either live there still or who have kind of like matriculated from there. And I think there's something about, just the community there, the cost of living. I'd say similar things about Birmingham, where it actually makes it possible for you to be an artist and to kind of try your hand at creative pursuits that would seem really impractical anywhere else.
Like New York.
Yeah, exactly. New York, I really wanted to be a writer in New York too, but I was working all the time just to be able to live there. And rarely was I able to do like super cool New York things. So anyway, we wound up in Athens and lived there. Both of our children were born there. And at a point, it just started to feel like we had kind of come to the end of the line with it. There was a good job opportunity for my husband in Birmingham. I still have a part-time job with a medical journal as a managing editor. I don't do anything content related. I just kind of handle submissions, and I could do that from anywhere. So
Sure.
Birmingham started to look real good, and my sister and her family are here. They've been here for years. My brother and his family are in Atlanta. So it's crazy still for me to think about. At one point, my sister was living across the country. My brother was living in Colorado. I was in New York. And my parents were in Birmingham. And now kind of here we all are within a few hours of each other at the most. So life is weird.
That's amazing. It's
Yeah.
an amazing journey to get here. Obviously, the bookstore is a huge part of your life right now.
Yes.
And do you consider yourself a writer or a bookstore owner or both? And how do those sort of measure out right now? Which is getting the most of you?
It's a good question. I think I think of myself as a writer and a bookstore owner. I think the writer part of me is part of me the way, like, you know, faith is part of me. It's the way motherhood is part of me. It's sort of, it is a job. Absolutely. I mean, a writer must write, right? That we have to at least say that much. It's a practice. It's a discipline. It is a job, but it also just feels, at the risk of sounding really hokey, just kind of a spiritual part of my life. And I mean, in many ways, the bookstore does too, but I feel like being a bookstore owner is a vocation. It's something I'm also, I'm just so new at it. So it's like, I feel like this is an apprenticeship in a lot of ways. And it's sort of humbling and a huge honor to get to kind of help be in charge of something that you really are still learning about all the time. And I'd say the same about writing, really. I mean,
Sure.
it's such a you don't stop learning. You don't stop trying to do better. In terms of how my time is split, you know, that's always the like holy grail of, like, you know, having your shit together, if I may.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think I just, you know, I try to squeeze time out of the day where time might not be readily available. I often, you know, I wake up early. I try to do my writing before my kids get up. It's been interesting, you know, since March, because we've just been in a very different schedule, and I've tried to kind of adapt to their needs. I'm not a real, at this point in my life, and I haven't been for a long time, like write all night or write late into the night person. I'm sort of like, I need that early energy. And I really do feel down when I'm not spending some time on that, in that practice.
Yeah.
I feel like an emotional, just kind of like downturn in my soul. I just, so even when it's, you know, if it's just an hour, or even if I'm frustrated because I've maybe had 2 hours and I have a sentence or two to show for myself, it's just, that's okay, as long as I'm like making space for it.
As long as you tried.
Yeah, exactly. I'm kind of fine with that. And I've also given up on a lot of my like time compulsions, as far as like, this has to be done by this time, or I need to have a second book by this age. Like I was
arbitrary deadlines.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I had a lot of those at like 28, let me tell you. And I had a lot of those at 30, and I don't know, I'm at a point in my life where I'm sort of like, some things are in my control, some things are not in my control. I will say that I have a manuscript that, you know, we're trying to put out there in the world. I'm working on another novel. I always, as I'm like knee deep in a manuscript, have this fear like, what if this is it? This is the last idea I will ever have. This is the bottom of the well, and the well will run dry as soon as I write this last sentence. And you know what? Not so. Like, it just, the more I do it, the more there is to do. So that's kind of the wonderful wellspring of this life. You know, it just, or it's dreadful, depending on how you want to look at it. It never stops.
Absolutely. So I'm interested to know, like, when was there a moment in your youth where you just kind of knew that you wanted to write? Like, was there sort of this magical moment when you sort of acknowledged that this was a thing that you were supposed to do, or is this something you kind of realized over time? Or
that's a good question. I don't think I ever really consciously thought I want to be a writer. I don't know if I knew that was allowed. Like, I thought like writers just came fully formed. Like Beverly Cleary came out of the womb with like all her Ramona books. Like, it didn't occur to me that there was a process behind all of these books that I loved. I was an avid reader, and I wanted to be a librarian. I mean, I thought that's where the book people go, you know. Being a bookstore owner didn't occur to me either. It kind of was like, that's just something that I don't know. That's not a thing, you know. Even though I would spend so much time in bookstores, it was almost like I didn't know that could be a profession.
Right.
But I knew a librarian could be. I don't know whether that was kind of one of the like career day opportunities.
Sure.
And I thought I would be a teacher. I really, I mean, that was kind of the plan for a long time. But it really wasn't until I had a very encouraging high school teacher who was really hard on me. I was the editor of the school paper, and, you know, I remember kind of waltzing into her class senior year being like, it's in the bag. Like, I got this, you know. Calculus, not so much, but writing a good paper on, you know, Charles Dickens or Nathaniel Hawthorne or whatever. Yeah, I got this. And I mean, she straight up was like, this is bad, and we've got a lot of work to do. I mean, she really had more of that kind of college-y, and it just crushed me, and it made me work really hard. And I think about that. I mean, that was not creative writing, but it was a discipline. It was that sense of like, yeah, you may have some things to say. You may have a vague sense of organization for how you're going to say it, but is this good? I mean, would you call this like a good paper? You know, it's like, and then I was able to really explore all kinds of, you know, writing and just, you know, obviously the world of college just kind of opens up so many new doors. And it was really in college where I thought, like, I actually wanted to be a poet, which is, oh, wow, that's, no, I'm not a poet, but I loved poetry, and I wrote a lot of it, and a lot of really bad poetry. But I thought, that was where I really thought, I didn't think I could do it for my life, but I thought I could identify in some way with that world.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Oh, I thought you were going to keep talking. I was just listening. I want to ask you a little bit more about Motherest, because I have read that book.
Oh, okay.
But I want to ask this while it's on my mind.
Sure.
I think we're the same age. I know it's impolite to ask people's age in the South.
I don't mind at all. I'm 42.
Okay, so I'm 40.
Okay.
And but I noticed that in Motherest, Agnes, she's in college during like the era of like Kurt Cobain and his suicide.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering why you chose to put your main character in that era when it's not the era exactly that you would have been in college, necessarily.
No, it was I would have been in high school. It was about, the book was about 93, 94, which would have been my like sophomore, junior year. I'll tell you, this is an interesting note about process and a good editor and a good agent, actually, who I think Emma was the first to suggest this. But my early draft of Motherest really did not place it in time. Like
Okay.
it was a, kind of settingless. I mean, it was a college campus, but it wasn't really fleshed out in Agnes's home wasn't really fleshed out in a particular place. It was sort of, and I thought it was, it was a loophole creatively. I was like, I don't know. So there's just not going to be one,
Sure.
we're just going to, we're going to just go with ambient place,
Right.
ambient year. And, the suggestion was brought to me sort of like, why kind of, deprive your characters and your readers from that experience of being able to kind of be placed in a moment. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, you're right. I mean, the reason I'm not making a choice isn't because that's really my creative choice. It was more because like I couldn't fully decide. I didn't want to get the details wrong.
Sure.
I didn't want to like, I was like, now I feel like I have to, like what was happening in the world, what were the headlines, I really felt like that sounds like research. That doesn't sound like fun, but once I kind of said, no, that's actually seems like what this needs.
Sure.
I loved that process of being like, oh, I know what I'm going to do. And I think it's because, I will always have, I think the 90s, the, mid 90s were such a formative time for me. I mean, I can bring back taste, smells, sounds, the whole bit from that era of my life, which is handy when you want to kind of build texture and specificity into your book. And I think there's also just like a brooding quality to that era that went well with my protagonist,
Sure.
Where it's sort of like, this just fits. Where I think she also would have considered herself a little bit above the fray of, the true kind of groupies of, grunge and, that era, but was angsty, just like that music was, and the state of the world at that time. And you kind of throw in the New England winter, and it didn't feel so very far from my early college experience, but more so it was a kind of smushing together of some of my college experiences, not literally, but like more atmospheric college experiences with just a period of time that I liked. And it was exciting to, one of the kind of things that happened toward the book's release, there's a great site called Large Hearted Boy. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's been around a long time. It's run by this guy, David Gitkowski. But authors, and particularly debut authors, make a playlist for their book, even if their book has nothing to do with me. I mean, kind of especially if the book has nothing to do with music. And this could be songs that you listen to while you were writing it, or songs that your characters might be listening to if they could or would. So anyway, that was that was fun to kind of piggyback on what we'd already established in the book. So yeah.
Very cool. Cool. So yeah, and I mean, I remember when I was listening to Nirvana in like junior high, early high school, I wished that I had been of the age that I could go to these shows frequently and be a part of that. So I thought it was interesting that was a choice that you made. We'll be back with more Creative Alabama after this short break. And we're back with more of my interview with Kristen Iskandrian. Tell me a little bit about how your own experience with motherhood and pregnancy informed your writing of Motherest.
I mean, in many ways it didn't. I wanted my babies, and I think viscerally, kind of physically, the experience of, being pregnant, those details just, it definitely informed the writing of the book. That
Sure.
just the bodied experience of pregnancy. And I tried to imagine kind of, a younger person going through this, a younger kind of uncoupled, untethered person going through this. And in many ways, I think I thought, well, you almost would not have the luxury to feel your feelings, because you're probably, what you're feeling is fear all the time.
Right.
And in many ways, I kind of had, I had certain luxuries. I was excited. I was sort of, particularly with my first pregnancy, I felt just kind of elated and delighted, and like, this is really happening. We'd wanted it to happen for so long, and it had been a bit of a struggle. So it felt like this real victory.
Mm-hmm.
And I always, it's my personality as a person, and it's my, I guess, personality as a writer, where I like to kind of try to flip whatever I think I know, and imagine just a vacuum where my knowledge would be, and say, what if, and I also think there are some really uncomfortable moments, and uncomfortable physical moments, obviously, but just the anxieties and the fear of carrying this life and being responsible for something, and knowing that it's kind of forever. Mm-hmm. I really wanted to explore sort of the darker corners of that. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I feel like that was valuable for me, to kind of step into the shoes of someone who was just terrified and unready, but also still a person who was trying, and a person who had a lot of love to give, even if she did not have much practice, giving it. So I feel like, and I also, I was saying this about my writing personality, and my personality is like, I think I'm a bit of a contrarian. I like to always sort of be like, yeah, that's cool, but like, what about not that? Like, mm-hmm. What about the, which is where sometimes I can get, frustrated with, I'm not going down this avenue, but like political debates, because mm-hmm. It's like, there's so much, I think, on both sides, this kind of like preaching to the choir, and not a whole lot of like actually just listening to what is completely the opposite of what you're feeling, and allowing yourself to be uncomfortable and uncertain, and moving through that uncomfortability and uncertainty. So Agnes was that for me. Agnes was a vehicle for me to explore a lot of uncomfortable things, uncomfortable family dynamics, uncomfortable feelings about motherhood, terror and solitude and alienation and loneliness, all things that I have felt in certain, doses, but to kind of just recalibrate that into a character that felt true. I'm very wary of the advice to kind of write what you know, but I also think that it can be lovely to write what you know, but, to paraphrase Emily Dickinson, like, write it slant, mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be exactly what you know. That's right. Where your imagination comes in.
Right. People say write what you know, and so often that's pulling from your own life and your own experiences. And just based on what you've told me so far, your personal family life seems pretty great. Like, you seems like you have a great family dynamic with your parents. You want to be close to them, and
yeah.
The dynamic of Agnes and in the book with her parents is a little more.
Yeah, it's very fraught.
Right.
And I'll say, I mean, I think whatever one of the Russians, is it Tolstoy or Dostoevsky, is like every happy family is the same, but the unhappy families are all different, something like that. I mean, I really think, actually Laura and I have joked that if there's sort of one type of book, particularly, novel that we are drawn to, it's like novels about families, I mean, and whatever that may look like, but families are so hard, right? Like
right.
even great families
Sure.
are. There's so much when you think about this crazy idea that we're born into these kinds of pods of people, and that's in many ways how we are introduced to the world and everything in it. And so every family, I think, is really fraught. I feel proud of how, my family has seen my family in terms of parents and siblings and whatnot. I mean, everyone has seen some tough things, and that were here and that were, kind of close, I think, as far as family goes, is something I'm really proud of. I don't take that for granted. I also know that we've worked hard on that, and I think now raising a family of my own, I'm very aware, and and as a writer, I'm so aware of unhappiness and unhappy families, and I think to myself, what are the things that make for happy, well-adjusted kids, or kids who want to spend time with their parents. I will say that as a teenager, I did not want to spend time with my parents, and I'm sort of amazed. I've been around a number of teenagers who seem to really truly love hanging out at home with their families, watching the big game or, making meals. And I'm like, wow, that is something. Because I was just constantly trying to find my way out to go hang out with my friends or do whatever. I mean, in some ways, raising kids, you are kind of spending a lot of time shuffling through your own childhood and
sure.
Things you want to keep, things you want to maybe change. So, yeah.
Yeah, when you talk about those kids that love hanging out, those teenagers that love hanging out with their families, I'm just like, it's saying it's like, are you a pod person? What's going on over here?
I'm so amazed. It's just,
I'm always like, how sheltered have you been?
Right. I'm like, do you know there's other people?
Yeah, you can escape.
Yeah. It's true.
But then, I also have a nephew who's 10, you're starting to see those kinds of signs of pushing away a little bit, and it's like, oh no, we're gonna lose him.
Right, I know.
He's so much fun to hang out with.
I know.
And it's gonna be 5 or 6 or 7 years before we get him back.
I know.
And it's like, oh well.
It's crazy. I think. I also think just my older daughter is 11. She'll be 12 in October, and she's certainly in the last year or so really craves her own space. Mm-hmm. This has been the first year of the closed door, where I'm like, oh gosh, that is a milestone. The door is, my 8-year-old is oblivious to whether a door is open or closed, and I mean all the time. So sure. It's just funny, but I also think we're in this kind of interesting time culturally where, my parents are immigrants. My family, my parents were born and raised in Iraq, and my brother and sister were born there as well. And they immigrated here, and I was born here.
Okay.
So I can't call my parents boomers because that's
sure.
an American thing. But my in-laws are boomers.
Uh-huh.
And I think there's something about that generation raising kids where there really was this sense of son, you need to go get a job and
mm-hmm.
make money. And now it's time to do this. And now there was a linear type of parenting. It
sure.
was very top down. It was usually kind of authoritarian. And I think the family model has changed a lot since then, where I do think now, we're learning more about kids' need for autonomy. And I mean, I think I can be a bit of a hard-nosed parent, but I'm also sort of like aware that, the structure just isn't what it was when I was, I feel that my kids feel freer with me than I really felt with my parents.
Right.
And I see that happening a lot. So I'm kind of interested in this, like, what's going to happen? Like, what's going to happen when the children realize their power? It's kind of frightening.
Oh, man. So let's talk a little bit about your process. I mean, do you start with a character, or do you start with an idea for a plot, or is it a little bit of both, or is it just whatever happens?
So when I write short stories, it's sort of an envisioning of the whole story.
Okay.
I can think about it in totality, or at least I can think about a scene that to me is evocative enough that will create the tension and the rest of it.
Right.
So it's a really different process than writing a novel for me. And when I'm writing a short story, I get very obsessive. Like when I start it, I really want to finish it within a few days, because I feel like there's something propulsive that has to drive a short story, which isn't to say that there aren't fabulous short stories that may have been worked over for months and years. And there are certainly some that I have been tinkering with for a very long time. But I mean, the bones of it and the kind of pace of it, I feel almost this like anxiety to get through quickly. With novel writing, it's so different. I'm so slow, and I usually have very little idea what's around the bend. I know, writers who do the, Post-its on the wall, the kind of like beautiful mind, like, well,
right.
this character is coming from here at 70 miles an hour. And then this is going to, it's just this almost mathematical, not formula, but method. And I am so kind of methodless, I'll be honest. Like I start with generally a character.
Okay.
If it's a setting or a kind of like conflict, it's really it happened because of a character. The character will really come first.
Okay.
Or the relationship will come first. And from there, it's just kind of like I try to think about action. I try to think about what pleases me when I read a book, which is, I want to call it a creepiness, but I don't mean that in a gothic or macabre way even. I just mean more of like almost the creep of the story. Like I want to be surprised. I feel like that's really important to me. I don't want to necessarily know soup to nuts what's going to happen. But that being said, will sketch out like almost chunks of outlines.
Okay.
Kind of like this is where we are, and this is maybe where I want to get, and
Okay.
I need to figure out what all happens in here. And then I'll usually kind of try to come up with what I want the next turn in the road to be, and maybe like stop there for the day or the week or wherever I am, and then kind of my non-writing time, as many people have said, can be writing time too. So I'll be walking the dog or trying to fall asleep at night, or, just that kind of idle time, folding laundry, whatever, just those tasks that are, that can quiet the mind a little bit.
Right.
And I'll think really
Right.
hard about kind of like, what is this character's motivation, or what would be the thing that would carry this character from point A to point B, or, what is a conflict or, an idea that I've been really like puzzling over in my own life that I would like this space and this time to explore. narratively. And that's usually where my ideas come from. It's sort of a slow build for the novel.
It kind of sounds like my video editing process. Like there's a lot of not editing.
Yeah.
But my brain's always kind of working through what I want to do with
Yeah.
the video that I know that I've shot. And eventually I'll just sit down and it'll
be there.
It'll just come out.
Yeah. I mean, I do think there is something to that kind of practice of or getting out of this like compulsion that like your writing time or your productivity is actually like applying words to the page or applying like video to the screen or whatever it might be. I mean, a lot of that has to happen in a dormant state. It's sort of like how our dreams form, it's just like there's a lot of creativity to be unlocked when you're not just hands clenched begging and praying for it to happen. That said, I'm not a writer who kind of like waits for the spirit to move me like that. I would never write, the spirit does not move me. I really, I need structure. I need routine. It's very kind of unromantic, my approach to it. I just need to like carve out the space and the time as I would exercise or any other discipline. And I really do. I had a collection of Post-it notes that I would leave on my computer over the years, like many years. And like for a period of years, it was like, be better. And then it was be less careful. And then it was go faster, because I do sometimes procrastinate while I'm working. It's that like where you're really, you might be duping everyone else, but that you are like, I'll just be making a paragraph so perfect and beautiful because I am, I'm scared to move on to that next thing that frightens me. And, I think it's always good advice to try and write what scares you and, jump into that fray. And I will definitely pace around until I am ready to plunge in. So I try to kind of motivate myself. And my goal is to always just be better. I just want to be a better and better writer, a better and better reader, a better and better person. It's the whole thing. And writing's just one place where I can feel like the gifts of steady work. Excellent.
That's all great answers. I want to go back to what you said about waiting for the spirit to strike you. A lot of times if you wait for the spirit to move you to do anything, or at least for me, when I wait for that, I'll sit down and I've got the spirit, right? And then all of a sudden the stomach says, I want some chicken fingers.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, okay, well, I did this. Yeah. I did two things. I'm going to eat some.
Right. I deserve a break now.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The spirit says that I need a break now.
Right.
So
I made this much progress.
Yes, exactly.
Time for a break.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
So, this is one of those things that I think a lot of podcasts in this vein will ask, but what do you have any advice for aspiring writers or creatives in general? Like, what would you say to someone? So here's kind of why I started this podcast, right?
Sure. Yeah. I
grew up in rural Alabama, and my family didn't really understand that someone designed this book cover and they got paid to do that or illustrated that, or even like a road sign or a sign on a business, or, that they write the newspaper. Right. Like, it's like it never really occurred to them that people were paid to do these things.
Yeah.
So when I started getting these ideas that like I wanted to do something creative with my life, it was always like, well, I don't think you can get a job doing that. I don't think that's a real thing. So, and as I grew up, I discovered, yes, you can. And I actually do these things for a living now. Yeah. And they're also, oh, wow, I'm so proud of you. You really figured it out. And like, I was like,
you cracked the code.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I know that with the internet and everything now, people are more aware growing up that these kinds of careers are available to them if they sort of put their nose to the grindstone and figure out the tools. But I think it's nice to tell people how they can sort of,
Sure.
or just show them that real regular people figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, to the point.
Yeah.
What would you say to anyone who's trying to sort of aspire to be a writer?
I always love that question because I feel very sad to think that, there is a lot of messaging about kind of what's practical, and I'm a parent, and I am concerned about what's practical, but I'm also, it was really a proud moment for my kids to be at my book launch. It made me feel like I want them to know that this is a thing, and that people can write books and the books can be celebrated. That's a thing,
Right.
I think it's sort of viable to them as a result. In fact, I think it's kind of no big deal. At this point, they've
Sure.
met a fair amount of authors. They're kind of like, yeah, cool, you wrote a book, whatever, but
Just another writer.
yeah, wow, right. But I think my advice is, I guess it's twofold. In terms of the craft,
Mm-hmm.
I always say what probably everybody says, which is just like read a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Find your teachers in the books. And I don't think there's anything wrong with kind of finding who speaks to you, kind of your idols on the page, and, do some mimicking for some time. That's
Mm-hmm.
fine. That's kind of a way to figure out what your own voice can do.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually you'll know when you can kind of throw off those influences and really forge ahead with your own voice and your own style. But I think reading a lot and reading widely and reading books that are, it's great to read around and be the polymath who does a little bit of, ancient Roman studies, and then a French novel, and then a book of poetry, and then a beach read. And I think that's not how most of us read, but I think trying to figure out what speaks to you, why it speaks to you, and then like really digging in deep and learning as much as you can about the tradition that you're trying to join is really important. I think we kind of have a responsibility as artists to be aware of the people who have paved the pathways in terms of like making a life as a writer, which is, I think, more to what you were describing with your upbringing and your family. I think it's important to take writing or the creative job a little bit off the pedestal
Mm-hmm.
in order to access it in a sustainable way.
Absolutely.
Because I think if you kind of say, well, I'm going to work really hard to save all my money to go like write my book in a castle for a year, like that's cool. I mean, that sounds great. But I think to be like a kind of practicing writer, a writer by trade, you need to really think outside of the box in terms of how you're going to spend your time and how you're going to spend your resources. There's a lot of debate right now about like to MFA or to not MFA. I think right now there are so many great online classes and programs available, even free resources a lot of time, where it's not necessary, to get that degree. I think if there are programs that will pay you to be there, or that, you can get like a teaching assistantship or financial aid where it's not going to financially burden you for your life,
Sure.
then that's might be a good route too. But really, I think it's possible to find these kinds of work from home jobs or part-time jobs, or to find ways that aren't going to completely drain your battery, that can pay your bills and keep you sharp and keep you kind of engaged and responsible to a world beyond yourself. But then to always guard the time that you need to make your movie or write your script or write your book or write your poems, like guard it with your life. That's what I have said to college age people and to kind of recent grads, is sort of like, you now are a grown-up who can decide to, squander the time or use the time wisely. And it's a career that can seem sort of luxurious and glamorous. And I think, it's very, very quickly we learn how none of those things it is, I mean, but the reward is really in the work. I can say that. I think the thing that makes me happiest now is not publishing. It's not conferences. It's not accolades. It's me by myself in the quiet with my work. It's just, that's the greatest gift in the world. And I think to make that like a kind of non-negotiable part of your day, if it's, if that's in the morning, if it's on your lunch break, or if it's after the kids are in bed, however it fits your lifestyle, over time, that's it. You're doing it. You're a writer. The other stuff along the way, you figure out kind of how to submit to contests, or, how to find an agent, or how to do the things that put you more in that industry publishing vein. But as far as how to be a writer is like, make good choices, take care of your brain, take care of your body, figure out how to earn some money. There are so many ways to earn money that don't require you to be like necessarily like married to the profession you're in. I know plenty of people who have, thriving 9-to-5 jobs that also still find the time to write their books, I mean, I can point to another number of people whose books are on our shelves who have done it while working, all manners of jobs. So, it's possible.
Excellent. I think that's it. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
I really appreciate you. And I'm looking forward to doing some more shopping in this beautiful bookstore.
Cool. Yeah, we'd love to have you.
And that's our show. You can find Kristen's book, Motherest, at most online booksellers, but also at Thank You Books and thankyoubookshop.com. She also has a website, KristenIskandrian.com. Thank you for listening to Creative Alabama. Please subscribe and rate us wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow the show on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Creative Alabama and creativealabama.com. Hope you spend the rest of your week creating something of your own.